Hello and welcome to another one of D's ADD videos. Today we're going to be looking at the concept of cooperativity. Normal enzyme substrate interaction gives you a hyperbolic curve in your substrate saturation curve. But sometimes you can see these sigmoidal curves being exhibited, in which it either takes more substrate concentrations to elicit the same velocity of a reaction or less, depending on what type of cooperativity we have. So we'll come back to that diagram. Basically what happens is the enzymes can bind these effector molecules to a site that's usually not the active site, and they can either increase the affinity or decrease the affinity by changing their conformation upon binding this molecule. So that's called allosteric regulation. Anytime we change conformation and as a result the binding affinity, when we bind another effector molecule, not the substrate, sometimes it is a substrate, but usually it's not. Like for example, hemoglobin binding oxygen, oxygen is the target, and the binding of one oxygen increases the binding of another. Okay, so the rate is increased, the affinity is increased, so that's positive cooperativity. Either cooperativity, as I indicated earlier, is going to give you a sigmoidal shape instead of the expected hyperbolic curve. And I just gave you an example of the positive cooperativity. Basically, the increased binding of substrate upon binding of a molecule or compound. Whereas negative cooperativity is usually when the end product binds and decreases the affinity of anything else binding. So for instance, hexokinase is an enzyme that phosphorylates glucose in the first step of glycolysis. So what happens is you get hexokinase adds a phosphate group on the glucose, priming it for glycolysis, and also tricking the intracellular stores into thinking it's got low glucose levels. Well, when too much of this glucose 6-phosphate accumulates, it goes back and binds to the hexokinase enzyme and shuts it down. So that's negative cooperativity. The binding of, in this case, an end product is shutting down the system, making it harder for hexokinase to bind another glucose. All right? So again, this is what you should see. For negative cooperativity, you're going to see more substrate concentration as you go to the right to elicit the same velocities, right? So take this velocity, whatever this is, took this much substrate, but almost 4 times as much substrate with the presence of the inhibitor molecule. Okay, so something bound to your enzyme changed the conformation to make the substrate harder to bind. Whereas the red line is indicative of positive cooperativity, where it binds less substrate to get a higher velocity. The blue line again is just the normal hyperbolic curve you would expect to see for a Michaelis-Menten enzyme that behaves normally. All right? So I hope I've clarified the concept of cooperativity. I will be going over specific examples in detail with the positive and the negative cooperativity. Make sure you understand these concepts well and be able to recognize them from a graph of a substrate saturation curve. Okay? I hope I've eliminated any doubts you might have. Thank you and have a nice day.